Greetings, my friends. This is the brain of TV's Pinky in the Brain, and you are listening to This Week in Geek with Mike the Birdman Dodd and the rest of the Twig crew. Twigs. Come to think of it, Pinky, I've not used twigs in any of my latest plans for world domination. If this works, then Mike and the crew will rule by my side. Yes! Brain, 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 brain.
What's going on? You are listening to ThisWeekInGeek.net. I'm your host, Mike the Birdman, and welcome back to a resurrected show. Hopefully I'll be doing these a lot more often in 2021, and this is Botched Roll. This is a show where I talk about either some of my stories about RPGs, maybe some game mastering tips, maybe some stupid player stories, or maybe just kind of recaps of some of the things that I've done before in the past to maybe give you a laugh, a chuckle, or maybe give you some insight into the world of tabletop role-playing. But we're going to do things a little bit differently today. I'm going to give you my impressions and thoughts of a role-playing game that's become hotly anticipated if you're in the tabletop world, and that is the latest release from our Talsorian Games. I am talking about Cyberpunk Red, which you really can't escape the Cyberpunk news. If you're a video game person, you know this game is coming out as of this recording in about 2 weeks. God willing, copies have already leaked into the wild. But the role-playing game is now available via digital. You can also pick it up physical if you can actually get to a store. So I've had this for a couple of weeks, but I've really dived in over the past couple of days to really kind of immerse myself in this, because I've always had a weird aversion to Cyberpunk, because my first Cyberpunk role-playing game, this one goes back all the way to high school with me. My first experience with the Cyberpunk genre was Shadowrun with my friend, I think it was my friend Ryan got me into it, or maybe it was somebody else. I want to say he was a big catalyst, because we played a lot of Shadowrun over the years, back when it was under FOSSA, before it went to Catalyst Game Labs. And Cyberpunk, I had a brush with in the early to mid-90s. I was in high school with my friend Brad, and I clearly remember this day, actually. We were sitting in my high school cafeteria, and we were done playing AD&D 2nd Edition. We had just finished a game of Star Wars West End Games 2nd Edition Revised, and we were looking for something different. And I didn't like Rifts by Palladium. I didn't get the system. I still don't get the system to this very day. And we wanted something different. And so Brad approaches me with this book, and it's called Cyberpunk. And I think it was Cyberpunk 2020, if I'm not mistaken. But I remember the cover. And we sit down and we start making characters. And I remember there was all these weird tables and randomness, how you could, determine your lifestyle, your, life path, as they call it in the game, what you dressed and looked like. And it was a lot more attitude than anything. And I remember at the time that being a really big turnoff. Now, admittedly, my friend was not necessarily the biggest and greatest thing in game mastering when it came to setting tone and mood. It was always like Michael Bay action piece to Michael Bay action piece. It was always moving from the next firefight to the next with not much story in between, whereas I felt Shadowrun, at least in my experiences, presented a bigger overall meta plot. And there was Lothweir, the dragon guy, and Dunklazan, and all that shit. And with Cyberpunk, Brad could never establish a tone. It was just, here's some cool cyberware, but there's no dragons. So I was kind of turned off by it for a long time. And then, flash forward 20-something years later, and we see a trailer for Cyberpunk 2077, and this was a couple of E3s ago. And it was done by the same guys who did the Witcher video game, which is CD Projekt Red. And I'm thinking, all right, that looks cool. And something clicked in my brain. You think that's based upon the old tabletop game? And it was. And so I heard a couple of videos on YouTube waxing poetic about Cyberpunk, and I read some of the books over the years, and I'm thinking, all right, this kind of seems interesting. And then fortunately I was afforded this opportunity thanks to our Talsorian and that wonderful team over there, who I must add are really great at answering emails at like any time of day or night. They sent us a physical copy of the Cyberpunk Red Jumpstart Kit. And I started reading that. I'm thinking, all right, this is really, really interesting, because the book made the lore come alive. And for me, if you want to get me interested in your role-playing game world, you gotta give me a really cool... You either have to make the rules so easy that I can teach it to somebody in 10 minutes, or you gotta give me enough lore that I want to spend half an hour explaining it to someone and get them excited about it. Like, I want to be able to present this, not quite like a PowerPoint presentation, but I want to get them like, okay guys, so this happens, then this happens, then this happens, but I don't want to give them so much information overload that they're like, this is like Lord of the Rings, and here, you must read the Silmarillion to understand what the fuck I'm talking about. So, going into this, reading Cyberpunk Red, this is a hefty book at like 450 pages plus. I'm reading it digital because when you're handicapped and don't have cyber legs, you can't exactly walk across the room and pick this thing up. So I'm going to assume it's really heavy. So reading this digital book has been a wonderful experience. Like, I am utterly impressed by the amount of love and care that has gone into this. You can tell how much they've updated the rules. Like, I know I have a friend of mine, Darla, talked about how not eloquent the rules were back in the day for Friday Night Firefight, and which is the combat system built into this game. And I was a little scared that it wasn't going to be modern gaming with this. Gotta say, quite the opposite. Like, it all breaks down to stat, skill, plus D10 versus whatever the difficulty value is. Either opposed to somebody, either way, beat this number, do X. So simple. Some of the rules, when you start factoring in armor and stuff like that, are a little more complicated at times. Like, I had to reference like how you like stabilize somebody in a few places, which thank God I have this book digital, because I can just type in the word, and I found it really easy. It's like tech plus first aid, and then you can stabilize when you get hit or wounded. Yeah, that's something else I should really note about Cyberpunk Red. This game is deadly. You do not fuck around in this game. You can die so fast. So don't get attached to anybody, but if your game master isn't a particularly big dickhead, your characters will survive. But also, this is a game I find you have to play it smart, but that ultimately depends on your game master and the type of story you want to tell. Of course, you can tell the big Michael Bay action movies. This is the first Matrix or the second Matrix with all these huge action scenes. Or you can do something a little more subdued. There's actually a huge section in the back of the book where it tells you, here are some movies that are very cyberpunk-like, here's some music that's very cyberpunk-like, how to set the tone for your game, what might be helping. There's actually a little section at the back where they say, encourage your players to wear leather and mirror shades. I don't know how I feel about reading role-playing books via sunglasses, but if I could get one of those samurai jackets, I think that'd be pretty kick-ass, actually, if they happen to make them in my size. But this is a game where the lore, if you can explain it to somebody and really get them invested, because it sort of takes the world... actually, IGN just did a wonderful breakdown of the world leading up to 2077. This game's setting takes place in 2045. So that kind of gives you an idea. Like, 2077 is obviously the evolution of where things are headed after the Night City Holocaust. Which, oh yeah, there's going to be spoilers in this. So 10 minutes in, now I tell you. But having the right setting and tone for your game and giving your players enough information can really make this world come alive. There's so many opportunities to create interesting characters. Like, one of the things I read, and I think this is so cool, the African nations all team up to create like independent space colonies. They decide, because they've been doing so much things in space with like orbiting space stations, stuff on the moon, that they launch rocks and mass drivers at the Earth, and they're like, you're going to leave us alone in all your corporate war bullshit, and we're independent, leave us out of it. That's very Gundam-like, and I find that remarkably cool. They also talk about a disease that I think hits in like the late 90s or 2000s called like the wasting disease, and it's this intestinal disease where no matter how you eat, you starve to death. They talk about this cabal of people in the U.S. government that was like the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, and somebody else, and they basically destroy the United States, and states break off and secede from each other, and not unlike Shadowrun, the U.S. is a complete disaster, but the rest of the world is also not exactly a pleasant place. But it very much feels that cyberpunk vibe. You don't necessarily need a huge dragon like lording over the world. Instead, you have corporations like Arasaka, Biotechnica, Militech controlling things. And it gives enough leeway for game masters where if you want to create smaller mega corporations, not unlike, if there's a game I played on Terrible Warriors called The Sprawl, and you could do the exact same thing here, but you make it up on the fly. Here you can do it as well, but I like having established big bads, with Arasaka being the big bad of them all. To talk about some of the rules, I love character creation. Oh my god, I love it. Okay, so there are 3 ways to make your character. There's one, which is called the complete package, where you literally pick and choose everything: stats, skills, cyberware, and you spend a lot of time and a lot of scrap paper. It's going to take you a while. There's one called Edge Runners, where you are a little more limited, but you pick from basically, I want to be a nomad, which is a person who like does vehicle shit, or you could be a fixer who's like a really smart guy who's really connected, or an executive, or a solo, or something like that, who's basically the cyberpunk version of like a street samurai. And you pick skills, and you pick a few things, you roll your stats there. Or there's my favorite, and it's not just because I'm lazy, but I like this. It's called Street Rat, and you just pick, like, okay, I want to be a rocker boy, and then you would roll some random things for your life path. Like, hey, what happened to your former lover? Maybe they were killed, maybe they're not. Was your family betrayed? How well off are you? What major events have happened in your life? Stuff like that. And that determines how your character's played out. It gives your character a lot of personality. Then it also, there's stuff on like how you dress, stuff like that. And part of Cyberpunk is a lot of the attitude. And I think a lot of that, your game master really has to be aware of that to create the right mood and atmosphere for this game, because I think it would be really effective, because they talk about useless shit like having an implanted LED watch, or having like fiber optic hair, or irises that can change color. They say polymer chrome is really in this year, or something like that in one of the paragraphs. So your game master has to bring that alive. Your game master really has to make you feel cool. Hell, there's even a stat called cool. And, you know, how obvious is your cyberware. Okay, and this I've got to talk about because I think this is so cool. Okay, so it's 2020 right now. Yeah, things are interesting. But they talk about gender reassignment and gender sculpting in this. And they say gender affirmation surgery in 2077, no big deal. It is what it is. And there's no way to tell someone at up close if they've been biosculpted. It's just become the norm. And they also talk about people adding different features to themselves. If a person wants to become a literal furry or whatever, if they want to add gills or foxtails or claws or like cat's eyes or whatever, they can do that. That's just biosculpting. You can do it, and nobody cares. It's like the norm, and I guess amongst the corporate elite, it's almost to be expected because you're so eccentric and rich. And I think that's really cool. They just say that. And because as a person who's disabled as well, they talk about how in, like, I think the mid-2000s, cloning has just become a thing, and cybernetics and everything has really advanced. So, for example, I myself am missing a leg. Yeah, they can just grow me a new leg in a matter of days or like a week or something like that. And if I want to keep a couple of legs chilling in a freezer, I can do that. And it's just implanted and it just works. Or if I want to do something that's purely replacement, I can do that. If it's therapeutic, it doesn't cause humanity loss, which is kind of Cyberpunk's version of essence loss, which would be a system carried over from like Shadowrun. So basically, how close you go into realizing you are better than people, it's a dissociative disorder and it fucks you up. But I love the idea that it talks about, prosthesis and augmentation. Some people do it because, hey, maybe this person was born without eyes. Now they have eyes, or maybe they lost a limb in a war. Maybe they got into a car crash. They can just replace that shit. And of course, Cyberpunk weighs heavy into cyberware makes the person. So you want to have a gun in your arm, you can do that. You want to have a laser. There's like a weapon that I think comes out of your throat, like a whip or something. That's weird, but you can do that. It's weird. It's cool though. Like, I love how much attitude plays into this. And just, I don't know, there's just something very magical, despite this game not having magic to it, that I really, really, really dig. There's just a lot here you can sink your like teeth into, and like I said, teaching this system breaks down to stat, skill, difficulty value. One of the things I kind of think is interesting is how they address net running, because when I played Shadowrun, my god did I hate deckers. The idea is cool. But net running is essentially New World Hacker, but here, instead of jacking into a system where you sit in a chair and you navigate cyberspace from the comforts of your couch, here, no, you put on what's like virtuality goggles. Think of it as like Google Glass, but you wander around finding access points or nodes. And I think that's neat. I don't quite get all of it, kind of. Like, I'm not sure how I'd run a netrunner in my group. I'm sure I'd sit down and reread the rules a few times. But I love that idea that you can move around in the real world, so you're not sitting there relying on your solo buddies to protect your ass. You can take a meat space action, their words, or you can take a net action, and that's determined by your roll ability, which is determined by your like character class. That's another thing, too. You can multi-class in this real easy. You just put your improvement points and like, hey, I am a solo. I would like to be a nomad. I want to be a media who becomes a fixer, stuff like that. There is so much flexibility in this game that I really, really appreciate it. And there's so much setting info that you can get lost in the details and you're never bored. And that's something else to kind of talk about this book too. It's laid out really, really well. Like, especially kind of digitally, if there's something you don't understand, type it in and you can find it. Now, as of this recording, there has been new rule updated errata, which some of it's important, like especially the rules for like auto fire. Like, they've changed some of the range values there. I mean, you can house rule anything if you really need to. Although I do find it weird with like auto fire, and I hope I'm reading this right. You deal 2d6 damage, and then however much you beat someone's difficulty value by, you multiply it, so you can deal like a shit ton of damage. Or you can not. Although your assault rifles do more single shot than they do via auto fire. I guess that makes sense. So I don't know why you wouldn't just single fire the whole time, but it's an extra dice of damage, whatever, or it's an extra couple dice of damage. I also like how everything is just, it's either D6 or D10. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. You can pick these up at any local game store, or you can buy a pound of them on like Amazon. I also This game does rely a lot on you knowing like how far away someone is, and that's always been something I've never liked in games. Like, you don't need to use a grid in this as long as you can accurately describe, hey, that person is about 30 yards away or whatever. I don't even know how far 30 yards is. Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind because that will affect values and modifiers and everything there. But I feel once you get a couple of practice sessions of Friday Night Firefight under your belt, you'll get the hang of it, plus how armor kind of stacks into it. But for the love of God, don't get shot in the head, because that does your damage multipliers times 2, and you are dead. That's another thing, too. You fail one death save in this game. Done. Game over. Hope you got another sheet ready to go, Choomba. Yeah, ultimately, this is a fantastic game. I had a lot more fun reading this book than I thought I would. I also like how it's a complete game. Making up NPCs is not going to be hard. Filling out the ranks of Night City is not going to be hard either. They also give you pretty detailed sections, or enough that you can figure it out for the different parts of Night City where the bomb went off. They talk about like the ruins, like there's ruined hospitals there, like ruined banks. It's slightly radioactive still, but hey, there might still be some cool shit out there. They talk about some of the towns that have been left abandoned in the countryside where like nomads have kind of taken up. I don't know. There's just so much rich material here. I'm very excited to see where our Talsorian takes this line, especially considering Cyberpunk 2077 takes place about 30 years later. After this, I hope there's a source book for 2077 at some point, but I guess they want this to be the new default setting. So I'm curious to know what the new Chromebooks are going to look like, which, if you're familiar with those, they're basically shopping catalogs full of new cyberware, new guns, new everything, right? I don't know. I'm excited, and I haven't been excited for a future property in quite some time, because I review a lot of D&D on this show. I review a lot of medieval stuff. I don't get a chance to dig into Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is my favorite genre of fiction. One of my favorite movies of all time is The Matrix. I love the movie Hackers. I love the movie Strange Days. And two of my favorite movies of all time are Aliens, and RoboCop. And you could very much argue they are Cyberpunk movies, even like Judge Dredd, even the 1995 one, or the one from 2012 with Carl Urban. So can I recommend Cyberpunk Red right now? Yeah, it is a steal for like $30 on DriveThru RPG. Totally worth it. Like, this is not a hard book you could get for people for Christmas. Just, hey, you know what? Here's a code. Download it. Let's play. Everybody's using Zoom or Discord. We are planning on doing something with this in the new year here on ThisWeekInGeek.net. I'm hoping to get Alex involved, maybe Liam, maybe Ken. I don't know. I mean, I know I've got some pretty big plans for Botched Roll, and we're doing the Wyvern Gaming's Stargate for our big actual play podcast next year. Maybe once we conclude the first season of Stargate, I'd be willing to run some adventures in Night City, especially once Cyberpunk 2077 comes out and the hype is there. I'm looking forward to it. So that is my review. Totally worth it. Like I said, polish those interface plugs, get that Neuralink ready, and get ready to jack in. This is the world of Cyberpunk Red, and I couldn't be more excited. So once again, a review copy of this game was provided to us by our Talsorian, and I don't think you're going to be sorry if you pick this up.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at ThisWeekInGeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.